Hi everyone, it's Missy, and today I'm going to show you how to make a gluten-free sandwich bread recipe for your bread maker. The bread maker I'm using is a Hamilton Beach brand home baker bread maker, and this one has the gluten-free setting on it. This is also a 1.5 to 2 pound capacity bread maker, so if you're trying to make this recipe for a smaller 1 pound, it probably won't work out too well because this one does fill up my pan in the machine. So you might be able to cut the recipe in half and get by with a 1 pound bread maker. Another thing too is this is my timetable for cycles. I will be using the gluten-free cycle for this recipe. I'll be using the 2 pound cycle, which is 3 hours and 40 minutes, meaning that the start of the first dough rise begins 10 minutes into the cycle, and then you will have the second kneading start at 35 minutes into the cycle, and mine counts down, so by the time it's going to do baking, it will do an hour of baking, and then mine does a keep warm setting for 60 minutes. Mine also takes the liquid ingredients first, so you'll be seeing me put in the liquid ingredients, then the dry ingredients with the yeast on top. Again, some bread maker models change that. They put the yeast on the bottom, dry ingredients and wet ingredients on top. So please consult your manual for your own bread machine so that way you put all the ingredients in the right order so you get a good loaf of bread. To get started, like I said, I'm going to start with my wet ingredients. I am going to beat 3 whole eggs, so the yolks and the whites. And this is just 3 large eggs. And beating the eggs helps get your bread going quicker. With gluten-free bread, it's always best to mix up your ingredients ahead of time instead of letting the bread maker do all the work, because then it gets a better rise and a better crumb texture. Okay, so there are my eggs. So I'm just going to take my pan out, and then make sure your paddle is in the pan, and I'm just going to pour that in. To the eggs, I am also going to add 1 2/3 cup water. And I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of butter. If you want to melt your butter beforehand, that's fine too. Just make sure that it's cooled down before you add it to your ingredients. You want all your ingredients to be lukewarm if possible. And then my last ingredient I'm going to add is 1 teaspoon of vinegar. And the vinegar I'm using is just apple cider vinegar. You could use white vinegar if you wanted to. Just got a little too much there. So I'm just going to dump that in. So for the dry ingredients, I'm going to come over and I'm actually going to whisk these together in a bowl first. And what I have in my bowl is 1 cup of white rice flour and 1 cup of brown rice flour. All you really need is 2 cups of rice flour. So if you want a white bread, just use all white rice flour. If you want more of a whole grain bread, I would use 2 cups of brown rice flour. But like I said, I'm just making an all-purpose standard sandwich bread, so I'm using half and half. To this, you want to add 1/2 cup of potato starch. And then you want to add 1/2 cup of tapioca flour. Or tapioca starch, it's the same thing. There we go. And then as more of a rising agent to help this bread get a good rise, I am going to use 2.5 teaspoons of xanthan gum, or you could also use guar gum if you have that on hand. I'll also be adding in 3 tablespoons of sugar. I'm using cane sugar, but you can use beet sugar or you can use a sugar replacer like Splenda, or I think Truvia is the new one now. So that's 3 tablespoons of sugar, and then 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And then the last ingredient I'm going to add is 2/3 cups powdered milk. So once you have all your dry ingredients together, you just want to give it a good whisk so it's combined. And then I'm just going to pour that into my bread maker pan. I'm not going to stir it in, I'm just going to pour it so it's right on top. There we go. And then finally I'm going to add the yeast, and this recipe requires 1.5 tablespoons of yeast. With the yeast, I'm going to say I have used quick rise yeast, I have used active dry yeast. What I'm going to recommend for this recipe is just make sure that on your bottle it says for bread machines. So that should work. So I am going to put my pan in my bread maker. Okay, so I got my pan in the bread maker. I'm just going to shut the lid. I'm going to plug my unit in. Okay, with my bread maker turned on, I am going to leave my crust setting at medium. You can change that to light or dark, it doesn't matter. It's already defaulted to a 2-pound loaf, so I'm just going to leave it like that. And then I am going to select my cycle. And my gluten-free cycle is number 3, which is 3 hours and 40 minutes. I'm not going to do a delay timer, so I'm just going to start. And what you're going to see is that it's going to start at the first kneading. And then I'll do a dough rise, and then an indicator beep will go off just so I could add like nuts or something, which I'm not going to do. And then it will start a second kneading, a second dough rise, a third dough rise, and then it will do the baking. So, like I said, the whole process is 3 hours and 40 minutes, so as long as you have a cycle that's about 3 to 4 hours, I think you would be fine. Otherwise, you could mix the dough up and let it rise ahead of time, and then put the pan in and just do the baking cycle, which is 1 hour in length for this recipe. But I'll show you guys the finished product when it is done. So here's what the bread looks like after it has been entirely cooled. I took the paddle out from the bottom, and as you can see, it did sink a bit in the inside, but I'll cut it open and you guys can see what it looks like. It has a really nice outer crust on it. Just gonna try to slice down as best I can. And that's what it looks like in the inside. Nice crumb texture and a great sandwich bread. And if you want the written recipe, I'm going to have it in the description box. If you have any other questions on how to make this bread, you can leave me a comment below. Right now, I'm going to do a quick thing of what I do with this bread. I normally don't use this bread for sandwiches, but I use it to make breadcrumbs for stuffing. And so how I do that is I cut the bread into 1-inch cubes. just like that. And then you can put these in an oven, or you can just leave them on the counter on like a drying rack to just dry overnight. But I'm going to put them in my dehydrator. So I'm just putting on the pieces, just scattering them on the tray as best I can. And once I get these trays full, I will show you the next step. So I got the whole loaf of bread cubed, and I filled my dehydrator trays. I have 5 trays on this unit. And so what I'm going to do now is put on my cover. Like so. And then when I plug it in, mine starts. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the temperature to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. This is typically the one that you use to dehydrate fruits and vegetables. And for breadcrumbs, it's going to take 3 to 4 hours. I'm kind of leaning to 4 hours because this bread has a lot of moisture in it. And it's a very buttery, nice bread. But it also makes excellent stuffing. So that's why I'm making the breadcrumbs, and you can also make croutons out of it. It's really universal. But when it has finished drying, the breadcrumbs should be hard. They should feel dry, just like croutons, and they should be able to crumble. But I'll show you what they look like after they have dried. And also, I forgot to tell you, if you guys are interested, I am using a Nesco Professional Food and Jerky Dehydrator. The model, I can't remember. I want to say, well, I have the box over here, just a second. So this is the one that I'm using. FD75PR. Okay, it's been 3.5 hours for me, and these breadcrumbs are dry. They're hard, they feel dry, and they kind of crumble when you pick them up. To store these, I put them in my mason jars with an oxygen pack, and the oxygen pack will absorb all the oxygen in the jars and thus seal the lids. You do not want to vacuum seal because the breadcrumbs and so forth would just crush into powder. So this is a great way to go. And also, make sure use your colored mason jars. You don't want light to penetrate your dehydrated goods. This is a great opportunity to use your colored jars because you're not supposed to use them for regular canning. And all you're looking for is like if there's condensation to show any moisture in 24 hours after putting them in the jars. If there is moisture, don't worry about it too much. You can take the contents out, put them back on your dehydrator trays, and dry again. And then just make sure that you wipe out any moisture that's left in the jars. Make sure your jars are dried thoroughly before you put the dried product in there. Otherwise, you can pick up usually these oxygen packs. I found these online through Amazon. Just make sure you purchase the right size pack for the right size jar. I got pints here, and these packs are 4 pint jars, just to make sure that they absorb enough oxygen out of the jar. Otherwise, they can store up to a year if they're properly dried and have the oxygen pack and the lids are sealed, and store them in a dark place. Room temperature is what I always store them at, and they should, like I said, be good for a year. And these make wonderful bread croutons for salads if you want to toss them with some kind of seasoning, and then you can also use them for stuffing, or dressing, which I'm going to use for Thanksgiving. I'm going to make a gluten-free crock pot dressing with these, so you can stay tuned for that video. But like I said, if you have any questions, you can leave me a comment below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.